So, unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are simple in that they perform all the functions and activities of life within a single cell. So these are organisms that do not live in the kind of colonial system that we see in multicellular organisms like ourselves. They include bacteria, of course, which we've talked about, the prokaryotes, which are tiny single-cell organisms that must have all the processes, all the chemistry of life occurring in one single cell in order to survive. But there are eukaryotes that do this as well. And they are therefore, while functionally simple in the sense that they don't have a whole ton of cells working together, in some ways, arguably, they also need to be complex, because while some of your cells can rely on other cells in your system to support them, and they can work together in a team, the cells of the single cellular organism is absolutely reliant on itself in order to achieve the goals of life and the requirements of life. So here's a couple of examples because I think they are really interesting. We've talked about prokaryotes, we've talked about bacteria, we've talked about the fact that you're covered in single cellular organisms on the outside, those prokaryotic bacterial organisms that are on top of you, that are all throughout your gut lining and all over the surface of your skin, etc. And there are also another large group of single cellular organisms, the protists and the single cellular eukaryotes. And here are some examples. So we've got a paramecium over here. It's a protozoan that inhabits freshwater ecosystems, and you may have already seen it before in your high school career underneath a microscope. And they are fantastic. They're ciliated, so they've got these little kind of beating cilia, the kind of arms on the outside that allow them to move. And you get some protozoans that have flagella and are therefore able to move that way. And they often, as an example here with this unicellular algae here, they're often found in freshwater systems as well. And they're often supported by photosynthesis so they can get energy from the sun. And they are fantastic and really easy to find and very, very common. Now, these are great, and I've just popped up this teaching note because these are fantastic because there is a huge range of these organisms and a huge range of multicellular macroinvertebrates, etc., that you can easily collect in freshwater ecosystems in and around many urban and rural centers. So right down here, just down the street in the creek, you're going to find single cellular and multicellular organisms that you can see underneath a microscope and you can present to kids. And often they are in such amazing density, it is so shocking. A small container of water can contain literally thousands of them, and kids absolutely love looking for them in these freshwater systems. And there's tons of them, and there's algae, and there's predation going on, and there's predator-prey interactions, and there's all these kinds of processes are occurring on an absolute micro scale, and it's fantastic to get these under a microscope. And I do it all the time with my kids just down the road with freshwater systems just really, really close. The support material wise, because I know this can be moderately scary if you haven't done a lot of biology, there is a whole ton of identification supporting material and classification material, etc., all accessible online. And I would recommend that you pop online and have a look for some of that support material just to help you out, because let's be honest, we're not geniuses at everything we do. And even as a very experienced biologist, I love having the ID sets and the ID information right beside me at any one time. And even with macroinvertebrates up here that I've done a lot of work on, you really need some kind of support to ID all the possible organisms you could be finding. This here is an alternative bit of extra research you might want to do with Crash Course Biology. You could watch some of that. Again, there's a whole ton of other resources you could be watching to have a look at comparing and contrasting unicellular and multicellular organisms, as well as an understanding of the single cellular organisms like this one from Crash Course Biology. Okay, so let's get into multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms are made of many cells by definition, most of which are highly specialized to perform particular functions or particular processes. So for instance, your body is a whole series of specialized cells working together for the outcome of life. When a cell is becoming specialized, it is said to be differentiating. So cells start with a kind of a very general shape, and of course they then need to specialize to form specific cell types such as muscle cells, such as neurons, such as oocytes and so bone cells, etc. All of these specific cell types have specific features, and consequently they must change to meet those features, and that process is called differentiation. Some of its genes are being activated and expressed. These genes determine how the cell develops. So remember that they're all carrying DNA, they all have these nucleus. Now there are some specialized ones we'll talk about just here, but they all have these nuclei. The nucleus has a DNA. The turning on of specific sections of that DNA, what we refer to as genes, defines the abilities, if you will, of that cell based on the specific kinds of organelles it has that allow it to do the function that's required for its part to work in the multicellular organism that is us. So the nucleus of each cell, some specialized cells such as red blood cells don't have nuclei, however, contains all the information required to make each type of cell present within the whole organism. However, only a selected part is needed in any one cell and tissue. So what happens is that the specific cell, let's say that's a muscle cell in a large muscle in your body, is using specific aspects of your DNA that are important to the function and the development of that cell type in that situation. Now, it's carrying all the rest of your DNA, but it doesn't use it. It differentiates its cell type to meet the needs of the situation in which it is placed and the outcomes it is required. Okay, so let's talk about some advantages in multicellularity. Multicellular organisms are able to better adapt to a variety of environments and conditions because they can form specialist cells and tissues to perform specific tasks. So they're large, sure, these kind of macro organisms, large organisms, but what's really important about them is they can take specialist cell types in their bodies to do specific tasks that they specialize on. So muscle cells are an excellent example. Now, the example I've just put in there is a bearded dragon, and just the note there is that they have these specialized cells such as skin that might have a specific function that would make them useless in muscle cells within the exact same organism. Now, there's a whole bunch of further research you could be doing, but this is just one example, but there is a whole ton if you pop online and you'd like to look into some of these specialist cells, just to have an idea of some examples of such specialist cells. Now, what I wanted to do now, so we've talked about single cellular and multicellular organisms. What we're going to quickly talk about now is multicellular organisms in the way that they have levels of organization. So organization is a defining feature of living things, and we require organization. And in multicellular organisms, we then have organization in the specific types of cells, but we then have them in forms of tissues and then of large organs where cells are working together for the functionality of the organ. So organisms are organized according to a hierarchy of structural levels. Chemical and molecular level, so this is the tiny subcellular level, atoms and molecules from the most basic level of organization. This level includes all the chemicals essential for maintaining life. So this is why you started with chemistry 6 weeks ago, because now you understand molecules. Beyond this, we have this concept of organelles. These are the subset, the small functioning units within a cell. They can't live by themselves because they're not a cell, but they have function within cells. We then have the cells themselves, the basic level on structure for living things. And then beyond this, we have this concept of tissues. Now, tissues are composed of groups of cells of a similar structure that perform particular related functions. So we have similar groups of cells, say muscle cells, for instance, that are together, that have similar function and work together for a similar function. The next one up is organs. So an example of which would be the heart. So it has tissues in the form of muscle tissues in the heart, which are made up of muscle cells within the heart, and they're working together for the functional process of the heart as an organ. And from here we go to what's referred to as systems. In animals, organs form parts of larger units known as organ systems, or organ systems is an association of organs with a common function, i.e. a digestive system or an excretion system, or using the example of the heart works with your vascular system to make a circulatory system. So these are a system level. These are some examples. We've got some kidney tissue up the top, and they function together, so they are a tissue, and they function together to form the organ that we call the kidney. And this is part of a sequence of organs and structures that we refer to as the excretory system.